Many of you have heard, or you've been told, that Muslims are terrorists. Muslims are fanatics. Muslims are heretics. Muslims are extremists. Muslims are murderers. Muslims are hostage takers. This is what you've been told. And I'll tell you that in some cases, that is true. There have been certainly some Muslims, not just recently, but even before newspapers and the media came about, there have been some Muslims who were the meaner element of the Muslims who have done those kinds of things, certainly. But then let's be objective. Let us go to history and be objective. Have not Jews and Christians also done those things? And are they not also doing those things? Yes, they are. A criminal is a criminal. A sinner is a sinner. But you would never see in the media a Christian pedophile. You would never see a pedophile called a Christian pedophile. You would never see a murderer called a Christian murderer or a Jewish murderer. Timothy McVeigh wasn't called a Christian terrorist. Charles Manson wasn't called a Christian mass murderer. The IRA is not referred to as a Christian terrorist organization. Yet they are in fact committing, and they have committed, some of the gravest, repugnant crimes, but they're not referred to as Christian terrorists, Christian fanatics. Then I ask, why? Why, when a Muslim is accused, maybe not even indicted, maybe not even convicted, but if a Muslim is simply accused of something, he is called a Islamic fundamentalist, Islamic fanatic, Islamic Muslim terrorist. Why? Because the media is controlled by people who want to malign Muslims and Islam. And I say that's unfair. While yes, that is true, that some Muslims themselves are responsible for some of the distortions about Islam. Some of the distortions about Islam, some of the misconceptions about Islam is as a result of the misbehavior of some Muslims, and that is to be fair and objective. But I think if you examine history and you ask yourself the question, who perpetuated the international slave trade that resulted in 80 million people being traded like hogs and dogs over a 400-year period of time? This wasn't Muslims, but they weren't called Christian fanatics, although certainly those were, that was Portugal, Spain, America, Great Britain, France, all Christian countries, and collaborated with the Catholic Church. When the conquistadors went into South America and ravaged that country, killed and slaughtered the people, poisoned the natural resources, they were blessed by the church, and they're still blessed by the church, and nobody called them Christian terrorists. When the first settlers came to this country, there were people living here, in case you don't know that. Nobody discovered a country where people were already living. I can't come to your house and just set up home in your house and say I discovered it and put you out. There were people living here who are now called Aborigines, a very nice word, Aborigines. It's like the native Indians in America. They're called the native Indians. They're not called Americans, they're called native Indians. This is because Christopher Columbus, he sailed looking for India. And he wound up in what is now called the Americas, but the audacity and the chauvinism. See how chauvinistic the people are. Even though they knew it wasn't India, still, how chauvinistic they are, they still call the people Indians. And today, they call them native Indians, but they call themselves Americans. And today, you call the native people here Aborigines, and you call yourself Australians. Now, how this country was taken, you were not invited here, but it was taken with blood and slaughter. Terrorism in its purest form, but nobody called those people Christian terrorists. And now that you have sophisticated civilization here, Sydney, Australia, Brisbane, Australia, Melbourne, Australia, I mean, you know, down under, you got this, you had the Olympics here. It's all forgotten about now. And still, terrorism by governments still go on. And I don't say that terrorism by governments or individuals is right or moral. It is not. It is not. But we can't, on one hand, call some people in Afghanistan or some people in Chechnya or some people in Kashmir or some people in Palestine or some people in Somalia or some people in some other part of Africa or some other people in Indonesia. You can't call them terrorists because they are seeking freedom from oppression when you justify in your own history that you did the same thing, but you glorify it and you justify it now. It's not fair. I say that a crime is a crime, whether it's done by some uneducated, unsophisticated people or some very educated and sophisticated people. A crime of government is just as bad as a crime of the individual. Yet the crimes of governments, they go unchecked because governments have power and there's nobody that can check them. But individuals, governments can hunt them down and put them in check. So I say that this issue that Islam or Muslims being fanatics, that this is unfair. Islam is a system of faith. It is a global system of faith. In fact, in case you don't know this, 1 out of every 5 people in this world is a Muslim. A person who submits and accepts the basis of the 5 pillars of Islam and its belief system. And these Muslims are not in Arabia riding horses and swords and turbans and telling everybody to submit or die. No. All Arabs are not Muslims and all Muslims are not Arabs. In fact, only 19% of the Muslim world are Arabs. There are Muslims in every continent of the world. There are Muslims in over 53 countries of the world. And there are 23 countries of the world that have major populations of Muslims. As a matter of fact, the largest population of Muslims on the earth, they're not Arabs at all. It's Indonesia, your neighbor. They're the largest population of Muslims.